My name is Vivian. I'm 34 years old, and today marks exactly 2 years since my husband locked me in our basement. The sunlight burns my eyes as I step through that steel door for the last time. 2 years of darkness of listening to my husband and his mistress living in my house above me. But they don't know what I've been planning. They think they broke me. Today they'll learn how wrong they were. Before I share this nightmare, tell me where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you believe karma always finds its way, and like this video if you're ready to hear how I survived hell and came back stronger. I met Marcus at a medical conference in Boston back in 2018. The grand ballroom at the Marriott Copley Place was packed with over 1,000 healthcare professionals, but somehow across that sea of white coats and name badges, our eyes found each other. I was presenting a paper on improving ICU patient outcomes through specialized nursing protocols. As head nurse of the cardiac ICU at Massachusetts General, I'd spent 3 years developing this program, and the results were impressive enough to earn me a spot as keynote speaker on day 2 of the conference. Marcus approached me after my presentation. He was 37, then tall with salt and pepper hair that made him look distinguished rather than old. His confidence filled the space around him like expensive cologne. He introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Fitzgerald, Chief of Cardiac Surgery at Boston Medical Center. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced but genuine. He asked intelligent questions about my research, really listened to my answers, and suggested we continue the discussion over coffee. That coffee turned into dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the North End. Marcus knew the owner spoke a little Italian to the waiter and ordered a wine that cost more than I made in a day. But it wasn't the money that impressed me. It was how he made me feel seen. He asked about my childhood in small-town Vermont, about why I chose nursing over medical school, about my dreams beyond the hospital walls. When I told him about losing my parents in a car accident when I was 22, he reached across the table and held my hand. Not in a pushy way, just supportive, understanding. We started meeting whenever our shifts aligned. Late-night dinners after 18-hour days. Early morning runs along the Charles River before dawn rounds. He'd text me funny observations about difficult patients, inside jokes only medical professionals would understand. 3 months in, he invited me to a medical charity gala. I borrowed a dress from my roommate, worried I'd look out of place among Boston's medical elite. But Marcus introduced me proudly to everyone, his hand gentle on my lower back, calling me brilliant and innovative. His colleagues' wives welcomed me warmly, though I noticed how they examined my borrowed dress and department store shoes. The proposal came 8 months after we met. Marcus flew me to Napa Valley for what I thought was a wine-tasting weekend. Instead, at sunset in a private vineyard, he dropped to one knee with a 3-carat diamond that caught the dying light like captured fire. He spoke about building a life together, about the family we'd create, about growing old in a house full of grandchildren. I said yes before he even finished talking. My hands shook as he slid the ring on my finger. It was everything I'd dreamed of after years of focusing only on my career. Our wedding took place the following June at the Chatham Bars Inn on Cape Cod. 200 guests gathered under white tents overlooking the Atlantic. Marcus's family had old Boston money, the kind that came with summer houses and trust funds and box seats at Fenway. His mother Eleanor wore a Saint Laurent suit, an expression that never quite reached approval when she looked at me. During the rehearsal dinner, she mentioned 3 times that Marcus's ex-fiancée had gone to Harvard Medical School. But I didn't care. Marcus chose me. During our vows, he promised to protect me, cherish me, and build a life that would make me proud. His voice cracked with emotion. Several guests dabbed at tears. The honeymoon in Santorini was paradise. 2 weeks of infinity pools, private beaches, and dinners on terraces overlooking the caldera. Marcus was attentive, romantic, passionate. He'd wake me with breakfast in bed, surprise me with couples spa treatments, make love to me under Mediterranean stars. We talked about trying for children soon, about buying a bigger house, about maybe opening a joint practice one day. He said I was his soulmate, his perfect match, the woman he'd waited his whole life to find. Our first year of marriage exceeded every fairy tale I'd read as a girl. We moved into Marcus's colonial in Wellesley, a 5-bedroom house with a pool and gardens that required 2 landscapers to maintain. Marcus insisted on hiring a housekeeper, so I wouldn't have to worry about cleaning. He'd surprise me with weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard Broadway shows in New York, skiing in Stowe. When I got promoted to Director of Nursing Excellence, he threw a party for 50 people making a toast about how proud he was to call me his wife. But the best parts were the quiet moments. Sunday mornings reading the Globe together in bed. Cooking elaborate dinners while dancing to jazz in our marble kitchen. Long walks through the Arnold Arboretum planning our future. Marcus would describe our future children in detail, their mother's compassion, their father's intellect, private schools, violin lessons, family vacations to Europe. We converted 1 bedroom into a nursery painted soft yellow gender neutral. I stopped taking birth control. We made love with purpose, now both of us eager to start our family. Marcus was protective in ways that seemed caring at first. He'd text constantly when I worked late, wanting to know I was safe. He preferred driving me to work himself rather than having me take the train. When male colleagues complimented my presentations, Marcus would joke about them having crushes on me, then pull me closer possessively. I found it flattering proof of his devotion. My friends envied our romance. Here was a successful, handsome doctor who adored me completely. What more could I want? The changes started so gradually, I almost missed them. It was month 14 of our marriage when Marcus first came home past midnight without calling. He'd been in emergency surgery, he said, a complex triple bypass that ran into complications. I'd made his favorite dinner, beef Wellington, letting it go cold as I waited. He apologized profusely, brought me roses the next day. But then it happened again the following week, and the week after that. His phone developed a password when it had never had one before. He'd angle the screen away when texting, claiming it was patient confidentiality. The home iPad we shared suddenly required his thumbprint to unlock. When I asked about it casually, he said the hospital required new security protocols. His explanation made sense, but something felt off in how quickly he offered it, like he'd rehearsed the answer. Physical intimacy became rare. Marcus claimed exhaustion from increased surgical schedules. When I'd initiate, he'd kiss my forehead and promise tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week. Next week came next month. I bought expensive lingerie, cooked romantic dinners, planned surprise date nights. He appreciated the efforts, but remained distant, distracted. Once I found him sitting in his study at 3 a.m, laptop closed, just staring at nothing. When I asked what was wrong, he said, "Work stress," and returned to bed without elaborating. The criticisms began small. A comment about my hair looking tired. A suggestion that I might want to join his mother's gym. Questions about whether I really needed that second glass of wine. He'd compare me to other doctors' wives subtly. Jennifer had lost so much weight training for a marathon. Sandra just got promoted to hospital administration. Catherine spoke 3 languages and was getting her MBA. I started doubting myself, spending more on clothes, considering Botox, wondering what I lacked that made my husband pull away. Then came the gaslighting. I'd mention plans we'd made, and Marcus would swear we'd never discussed them. I'd find receipts for restaurants I didn't recognize, and he'd claim they were business dinners I'd forgotten he'd mentioned. Once I smelled perfume on his jacket, something floral and young, nothing like my preferred vanilla scents. When I brought it up, he said I was imagining things, that maybe I needed to talk to someone about anxiety. He scheduled me an appointment with Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a psychiatrist, who happened to be his former colleague. The discovery happened on a rainy Thursday evening. Marcus had left for a medical conference in Philadelphia, or so he'd said. His iPad, the one that now required his thumbprint, lay charging on his nightstand, but he'd forgotten to lock it after using it. My hands trembled as I picked it up, telling myself I was just checking the weather. Instead, I opened his messages. Her name was Isabella Rodriguez, 26 years old, pharmaceutical sales representative for Prometheus Medical. The messages went back 3 months. Explicit photos, graphic descriptions of their encounters, promises of a future together. One message from Isabella stood out: "Can't wait until you're free from that boring wife." Marcus had responded, "Soon, my love. I'm working on a solution." The photos showed a woman who looked nothing like me. Long black hair where mine was blonde and shoulder length. Curves that belonged on magazine covers while I was athletic from years of 12-hour shifts. Young, vibrant, exciting. Everything I apparently wasn't anymore. In one photo, they were kissing in what looked like Marcus's office. Another showed them at a hotel I recognized from a supposed medical conference in Miami. I sat on our bed, iPad in my lap, numb. Part of me wanted to smash everything in his study. Another part wanted to drive to Philadelphia and confront him. Instead, I took photos of everything with my phone. Evidence. Then I placed the iPad exactly where I'd found it and went to the bathroom to vomit. When I looked in the mirror, I saw what Marcus must see: a 34-year-old woman with bags under her eyes, stress weight around her middle gray roots showing. When had I become unlovable? For 2 weeks, I pretended to know nothing while gathering more evidence. I checked phone records, credit card statements, searched his study when he was at work. Isabella wasn't just a fling. Marcus had been taking her to restaurants we'd gone to while dating, buying her jewelry from the same store where he'd bought my engagement ring. They'd spent a weekend at the Chatham Bars Inn, the place where we'd gotten married. The confrontation came on a Friday night. Marcus was in his study and I walked in with printed screenshots of everything. His face went white, then red, then settled into something cold I'd never seen before. Instead of apologizing, he laughed. Actually laughed. Then he told me I was delusional, that I'd manufactured these images somehow in my jealous paranoia. When I showed him credit card records, he claimed identity theft. When I played a voicemail Isabella had left on his phone, he said it was a patient having a mental breakdown, that I'd misinterpreted everything. He scheduled an emergency session with Dr. Hoffman for the next morning. In her office, Marcus painted a picture of a wife spiraling into paranoid delusions. He'd prepared a folder documenting my supposed symptoms: insomnia, weight loss, baseless accusations, emotional volatility. Dr. Hoffman, who I learned later was being paid consultant fees by Marcus, diagnosed me with delusional disorder and severe anxiety. She prescribed antipsychotics that made me foggy and sedated. Marcus monitored me, taking them each morning, checking under my tongue like I was a psych patient. Meanwhile, I discovered Marcus had been moving our assets. Joint accounts were being drained into trusts controlled by his mother. The house was being transferred to an LLC he solely owned. My name was being removed from everything. When I tried to access our savings to hire a lawyer, I found myself locked out. The bank said only Marcus could authorize access now due to my documented mental health issues. Isabella became bolder. She'd call the house when Marcus wasn't home, hanging up when I answered. Packages arrived addressed to her at our address. Once I came home from work to find a wine glass with lipstick on the rim in our kitchen. When I showed Marcus, he said I must have had a friend over and forgotten. That I was creating drama where none existed. That maybe I needed inpatient treatment. The trap was set on a cold February evening. Marcus had been especially kind that week, bringing me flowers, suggesting we try couples therapy, talking about rekindling our romance. He said he'd bought a special bottle of wine, a 20-year-old Bordeaux he'd been saving in our basement cellar. Would I come pick it out with him? His smile was warm, familiar. For a moment, I let myself hope everything had been a nightmare, that my marriage could be saved. The basement of our Wellesley home had been Marcus's domain since we'd moved in. He'd converted half into a home gym and the other half into a temperature-controlled wine cellar. As we descended the stairs, he kept his hand on my back, guiding me. The cellar door was new. I noticed heavy steel with an electronic lock. Marcus said he'd upgraded security after some neighborhood break-ins. Inside, hundreds of bottles lined the walls in custom racks. The lighting was soft, romantic even. I was examining a bottle of Chateau Margaux when I heard the door click shut. The electronic lock engaged with a definitive beep. I turned to see Marcus standing by the door, no longer smiling. His expression was clinical, like he was observing a patient before surgery. When I asked what was happening, he simply said this was for my own good, that I needed time away from my delusions to heal. The wine cellar wasn't a wine cellar anymore. It was a prison cell. The room had been modified without my knowledge. Behind the wine racks on one wall was a small bathroom with a toilet sink and narrow shower. A twin bed with hospital-grade restraints sat in the corner. A small refrigerator hummed beside it. Security cameras blinked red in every corner. The electronic lock could only be opened from outside. The walls, Marcus informed me matter-of-factly, had been soundproofed during the renovation. No one would hear me scream. For the first 24 hours, I was certain this was temporary. Marcus would realize the insanity of what he'd done. He'd let me out. We'd get help. We'd figure this out. I remained calm, rational, trying to reason with him through the camera I knew he was watching. I reminded him of our vows, our plans for children, the life we'd built. The silence was deafening. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the soft whir of air circulation through vents I couldn't see. Marcus appeared the next evening with a tray of food. Simple things: sandwich, apple water bottle. He explained, like lecturing medical students, that this was a therapeutic intervention. I was sick, he said, and this controlled environment would help me heal. The medications he'd been giving me were in the food now. I needed to eat to get better. When I threw the tray at him, demanding he let me out, he simply cleaned up the mess and left. The lock clicked with finality. The first week was rage. I destroyed everything I could reach. Shattered wine bottles against walls, ripped apart the bedding, tried to damage the cameras. Marcus would wait until I exhausted myself, then send in cleaners while I was sedated. I'd wake to find everything repaired, replaced, pristine. Like my resistance had never happened. The cleaners never looked at me, never responded to my pleas. Later I learned they were undocumented workers who spoke no English, told I was dangerously mentally ill. Desperation took over in week 2. I begged through the cameras, promised anything if he'd let me out. I'd leave quietly, grant him any divorce terms, disappear from his life forever. I offered to sign papers giving him everything. Sometimes I'd see the red light on the camera flicker, knew he was watching. But he never responded. Food appeared once a day while I slept, drugged by whatever he put in the water supply. I tried not eating, not drinking, but after 3 days, survival instinct won. The story Marcus told the world was masterful in its credibility. I'd had a complete psychotic break, he reported tearfully to friends and colleagues. He'd found me attempting suicide, claiming voices told me to do it. With Dr. Hoffman's help, he'd arranged immediate placement at a discreet psychiatric facility in Switzerland. Expensive, exclusive, where prominent families sent troubled relatives. He showed forged admission papers, even fake photos of a scenic alpine retreat. My work received a medical leave notice with my forged signature. Friends who asked to visit were told I wasn't allowed contact yet, that isolation was part of the treatment. My disappearance raised few questions because Marcus had laid groundwork for months. He'd mentioned my increasing paranoia to mutual friends. Told colleagues about finding me talking to people who weren't there. Eleanor confirmed to her society friends that I'd always seemed unstable, that Marcus was a saint for trying so hard. The few people who pushed harder were shown falsified medical records, security footage of me destroying the basement that first week, taken out of context to look like psychotic episodes. Isabella moved in after month 3. I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood above her laughter, echoing through air vents. She redecorated our bedroom, I could tell from the sound of furniture being moved. The dinner parties resumed, voices of guests who used to be our friends filtering down. Once I heard someone ask about me. Isabella's voice, sweet and concerned, explained how difficult it must be for Marcus having a wife in long-term psychiatric care. Everyone murmured sympathy. The torture wasn't just isolation. It was hearing my replacement live my life. Isabella's morning routines in what had been my bathroom. Her yoga sessions in the garden I'd planted. Her voice calling Marcus honey baby love. The sound of them together at night directly above my cell. Marcus had positioned my prison deliberately below our former bedroom. Every intimacy was audible through the ventilation system. Sometimes I wondered if he'd designed it that way, intentionally adding psychological torture to physical captivity. Attempts at escape consumed months 3 through 6. I tried everything, pretending to be sick enough to need hospital care, but Marcus brought a private doctor who examined me in the cell. Attempting to damage the electrical system to force repairs, but the room ran on a separate generator. Writing messages on the food trays, but they were cleared by the silent workers who never made eye contact. I even tried to start a fire with frayed electrical cord from the refrigerator, hoping smoke would alert neighbors. The ventilation system simply extracted it, and Marcus reduced my food for a week as punishment. The lowest point came when I attempted suicide for real. Not as manipulation, but from genuine despair. 6 months in a windowless room breaks something fundamental in human psychology. I'd lost weight, muscle tone, hope. My reflection in the small metal mirror showed a ghost. I fashioned a noose from torn sheets, secured it to the overhead pipe I'd discovered behind a ceiling tile. But Marcus had cameras everywhere. He was inside within minutes, cutting me down, performing CPR with professional efficiency. He saved my life, then reduced my space further, removing anything I could use to harm myself. Even the sheets were replaced with tear-proof safety blankets used in psychiatric holds. Month 7 marked a shift in my strategy. I realized direct confrontation would never work. Marcus held all the power as long as he believed I was broken. So I decided to become exactly what he wanted to see. It started small. Thanking him quietly when he brought food. No more screaming or throwing things. I began eating regularly, even the drugged portions. Let him think his medications were working. The change had to be gradual, believable. By month 8, I was speaking to him calmly during his visits, apologizing for my past behavior, admitting I'd been confused, that maybe I had imagined things. I asked about his work, listened to his responses without anger. When he mentioned Isabella, I didn't react beyond mild interest. Yes, I understood she was helping take care of the house. Yes, it was good he had support during this difficult time. My voice stayed level, defeated, accepting. The act was exhausting. Every fiber of my being wanted to attack him, to scream the truth about what he'd done. But I maintained the facade. I started asking for books to pass time, choosing self-help titles about accepting reality and overcoming delusions. Made sure to position them where cameras could see me reading. Sometimes I'd talk to the cameras about insights I'd gained, how I was beginning to understand my illness. Marcus started visiting more frequently, staying longer, even sitting in a chair he'd brought down. During these visits, I became a mirror for what he wanted to see. When he complained about hospital politics, I sympathized. When he mentioned stress from surgery complications, I offered the kind of support I used to provide as his wife. Never crossing boundaries, just being a comfortable presence. A broken bird grateful for its cage. He started sharing more, letting his guard down incrementally. The medications in my food decreased. The restraints on the bed were removed. Month 10 brought revelations. Marcus had grown comfortable enough to vent about Isabella. She spent too much money, he said. Credit cards maxed out on designer goods. She didn't understand the demands of his career, complained when he worked late. She'd gained weight, stopped trying to impress him. The honeymoon phase was over, and reality was setting in. He'd mentioned these things casually, like we were old friends catching up. I made sympathetic noises, careful not to seem too interested. The real intelligence came from listening. My cell was directly below their bedroom, and arguments carried through the vents. Isabella accused Marcus of still loving me. Marcus accused Isabella of only wanting his money. She threatened to leave. He threatened to destroy her career. The fights escalated week by week. Once I heard a crash, like someone throwing something. Isabella screamed that Marcus was just like her ex, controlling and paranoid. Marcus shouted back that at least I had been loyal, that Isabella was nothing but a gold-digging whore. Through fragments of overheard phone calls, I pieced together more. Isabella was still in contact with someone named Derek. She'd tell this person she loved them, that she was working on getting money from Marcus. That once she had enough, they could be together. She was smarter than I'd given her credit for, playing her own long game. But she didn't know Marcus like I did. His ego would never allow him to be fooled by someone he considered beneath him. The revelation about Martha came in month 11, the housekeeper who'd worked for Marcus since before our marriage. She'd been bringing extra food, hiding it in the cleaning supplies. Fresh fruit, protein bars, vitamins. Small mercies that probably saved my health during the worst months. One day she left a note. "I know you're not sick. I'm trying to help. Be patient." It was the first outside communication I'd had in almost a year. I ate the note to destroy evidence, but kept the hope it represented. Martha, I learned through careful observation, had been documenting everything. She had a phone that she used to record Isabella's conversations when she thought she was alone. She'd photographed the modified basement before I was imprisoned. She'd kept copies of receipts for the construction, the soundproofing, the electronic locks. Martha had a disabled son, needed this job desperately, but her conscience wouldn't let her be complicit in my imprisonment without trying to help. The letter she eventually smuggled out was addressed to James Morrison, a defense attorney I'd consulted briefly when I first discovered Marcus's affair. I'd paid him a retainer in cash money Marcus didn't know about. The letter contained enough details that James would know it was really from me, not some fabrication. It included a request to investigate quietly to gather evidence before making any moves. Martha mailed it from a post office 3 towns over to avoid detection. What I didn't know was that James Morrison was thorough beyond expectation. He hired a private investigator who discovered the paper trail Marcus had tried to hide. The forged medical documents had small inconsistencies only an expert would notice. The Swiss facility had no record of me. Security footage from neighbors showed me entering our house the night I disappeared, but never leaving. Credit card records showed Marcus purchasing construction materials for a project that didn't match any permitted renovations. The investigation revealed more than just my imprisonment. Isabella Rodriguez wasn't her real name. She was Isabella Petrova, originally from Russia, who'd been married twice before. Both ex-husbands had mysteriously lost significant assets before their divorces. She'd changed her name after the second divorce, created a new identity as a pharmaceutical rep. Her credentials were forged. Prometheus Medical had no record of her employment. She'd targeted Marcus, specifically researching him for months before their first meeting. Meanwhile, Eleanor, Marcus's mother, had made her own discoveries. She'd never liked Isabella but tolerated her for Marcus's sake. But when Isabella started redecorating the family estate in the Hamptons without permission, Eleanor had her investigated. The private detective she hired found Derek Coleman, Isabella's real boyfriend, a con artist with a record for fraud. Together they'd run this scheme before Isabella seduces wealthy men, extracts money, then they disappear together. Eleanor confronted Marcus with this information in month 13 of my captivity. But Marcus's pride wouldn't let him admit he'd been fooled. He insisted Eleanor was wrong, that Isabella loved him. Eleanor, disgusted by her son's blindness and increasingly suspicious about my sudden disappearance, started her own investigation. She found the same inconsistencies James Morrison's investigator had discovered. The Swiss facility, the forged documents, the construction materials. Year 2 began with the walls closing in on Marcus, though I didn't know it yet. The hospital had started an internal investigation after discovering discrepancies in his surgical logs. Times when he claimed to be in surgery but wasn't. Medications missing from the pharmacy that matched what he'd been giving me. Colleagues who'd covered for him based on false emergencies were comparing notes. The chief of staff, Dr. Robert Chen, had always disliked Marcus's arrogance. Now he had ammunition. Isabella's spending had spiraled out of control. She'd opened credit cards in Marcus's name without his knowledge, racking up hundreds of thousands in debt. The house was remortgaged without proper documentation. Investment accounts were being drained. When Marcus confronted her, she laughed and said it was payment for putting up with him. That he was boring, old, pathetic. That she knew what he'd done to me and could expose him any time. Mutually assured destruction. Derek had started blackmailing Isabella, threatening to expose their scheme to Marcus unless she paid him. She was stealing from Marcus to pay Derek, who was actually recording everything for potential future use. The con artists were conning each other while Marcus descended into paranoid rage. He started drinking heavily, missing surgeries, making mistakes when he did operate. 2 patients filed malpractice suits. The hospital board scheduled a review of his performance. In my cell, I sensed the change in Marcus's visits. He looked haggard, aged years and months. He'd ramble about betrayal, about how women couldn't be trusted, about how I was the only one who'd really loved him. Sometimes he'd cry, begging my forgiveness, saying he'd let me out soon once he figured out how to explain my reappearance. Other times he'd rage about Isabella, calling her names, describing revenge fantasies. I remained calm, supportive, even playing the long game. Martha had been in contact with James Morrison for months. They'd developed a plan for my extraction that required perfect timing. The police needed warrants which required probable cause beyond the circumstantial evidence. They needed Marcus out of the house for several hours to execute the search safely. Martha knew Isabella was planning a confrontation with Derek at a hotel 40 minutes away. She made sure Marcus would follow Isabella there, suspicious of her meeting. Eleanor had agreed to testify against her own son. The final straw was discovering he'd tried to access her trust funds using forged signatures. Her own child was willing to steal from her to fund his mistakes. She provided James Morrison with family financial records showing Marcus's suspicious transactions. She confirmed to investigators that she'd never seen any evidence of my supposed mental illness before my disappearance. Her testimony would be devastating from someone of her social standing. The FBI got involved when they discovered Isabella's immigration fraud. Her original entry to the United States had been under false pretenses. She was part of a larger network of criminals who targeted wealthy Americans. The federal investigation superseded local jurisdiction, bringing resources and authority that Marcus couldn't influence through hospital connections. They'd been building a case for months, my situation just one piece of a larger puzzle. 3 days before my rescue, Martha told me to be ready. She couldn't give details in case Marcus was monitoring her somehow. But she said freedom was coming, that I should eat everything she brought to build strength. The extra food she'd been smuggling increased. Protein shakes, energy bars, vitamin supplements. She even brought fresh clothes, hiding them in the cleaning supplies. Real clothes, not the psychiatric pajamas Marcus had been providing. The night before my release, I couldn't sleep. 2 years of captivity would end soon, but I didn't know how. Would police storm the house? Would Marcus kill me rather than face exposure? Would Isabella interfere? I spent the night mentally preparing for any scenario. If I had to testify, I'd memorized every detail. If I had to run, Martha had shown me the basement's emergency exit sealed, but not locked from inside. If Marcus tried to kill me, I'd hidden a shard of glass from a bottle I'd broken months earlier, sharp enough to defend myself. March 15th dawned gray and drizzly-fitting weather for what would unfold. I heard Marcus and Isabella arguing over breakfast. She was leaving for a shopping trip, she said. He accused her of meeting someone. She called him pathetic, said she was done with him. The front door slammed. Minutes later, Marcus's car started. Martha had texted someone that both had left. The house was empty except for me and Martha, who unlocked my cell door manually with keys she'd copied months ago. But I didn't run. James Morrison had been clear through Martha Waite for official rescue to make prosecution airtight. Don't give Marcus any avenue to claim I'd escaped, that I was dangerous. So I sat on my narrow bed in fresh clothes Martha had brought, listening to sirens growing closer. The FBI, local police, and emergency services arrived simultaneously. The basement door was breached with professional efficiency. When they found me, I was calm, composed, ready. The moment I stepped out of that basement into natural light was surreal. 2 years of fluorescent bulbs had left me photosensitive. The officers gave me sunglasses, wrapped me in blankets, though it wasn't cold. Neighbors had gathered, recording with phones, whispering speculations. I walked steadily, refusing the wheelchair they'd brought. After 2 years of captivity, I would walk out on my own feet. The news vans were already arriving as the ambulance pulled away. The hospital examination was thorough but gentle. Dr. Sarah Williams, the emergency physician, had tears in her eyes as she documented injuries. Malnutrition despite Martha's supplements. muscle atrophy from limited movement, vitamin D deficiency from lack of sunlight, dental problems from the drugs Marcus had given me. But I was alive, cogent, credible. Every word I spoke was recorded for evidence. Nurses who'd known me professionally couldn't hide their horror at what their colleague had done. James Morrison arrived with a team of attorneys. He'd been building this case for over a year pro bono after the retainer ran out, driven by justice and fury at what had been done. He explained what would happen next: criminal charges, civil suits, media strategy. The story was already breaking nationally. Respected surgeon imprisons nurse wife in basement. The headlines wrote themselves. My phone returned after 2 years had thousands of messages. Friends who'd believed Marcus's lies apologizing, begging forgiveness. Marcus was arrested at the hotel where he'd followed Isabella. The FBI had been waiting. He was caught with illegal substances in his car, drugs he'd been using to control me. Isabella was arrested in the hotel room with Derek caught with suitcases full of cash she'd been stealing from Marcus. Derek was arrested for blackmail and conspiracy. The image of Marcus in handcuffs broadcast on every news channel showed a broken man. His surgical precision had failed to account for human variables. Martha's conscience, Isabella's greed, my resilience. The arraignment was packed with media. Marcus in orange jumpsuit looked small. The charges were read: kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault, drugging without consent, forgery, fraud. Bail was denied due to flight risk. Isabella faced her own charges: identity fraud, theft, conspiracy. Derek's list was equally long. When the judge asked how Marcus pled, his voice cracked, saying not guilty. His attorney, one of Boston's best, looked uncomfortable defending him. Eleanor's testimony to the grand jury was devastating. She described a son she no longer recognized, consumed by ego and control. She detailed his financial crimes, his forged documents, his systematic destruction of my life. When asked if she believed her son capable of what he was accused of, she said yes without hesitation. The social fallout for her was immense, but she faced it with dignity. She publicly apologized to me, offered financial support, testified that I'd been a good wife her son didn't deserve. The hospital's testimony was equally damaging. Dr. Chen provided records showing Marcus had stolen medications, falsified surgical logs, used hospital resources for personal crimes. Nurses testified about his erratic behavior, his lies about my whereabouts. Former friends testified about the groundwork he'd laid: the slow assassination of my character before physical imprisonment. The defense tried to argue mental illness, that Marcus had suffered a breakdown. They brought psychiatrists who'd never treated him to speculate about possible disorders. But the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. The meticulous planning, the forged documents, the financial crimes all showed clear premeditation. This wasn't insanity. It was calculated cruelty. The defense's only real strategy was trying for a plea deal, which the prosecution rejected. During a break in the trial, Marcus asked to speak with me. His attorney advised against it, but Marcus insisted. In a secured room with attorneys present, he broke down completely. He begged forgiveness, claimed he loved me, that Isabella had poisoned his mind. He offered me everything he owned if I'd ask for leniency. When I remained silent, he grew angry, saying I'd driven him to it with my accusations. The real Marcus emerged a narcissist incapable of accepting responsibility. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge called it one of the most heinous cases of domestic abuse he'd seen. Marcus received 25 years without parole. Isabella got 7 years for fraud and conspiracy. Derek got 5 years. The courtroom erupted in applause when sentences were read. Marcus had to be dragged out, screaming that I'd destroyed his life. The irony was lost on him. The civil suit was settled quickly. Marcus's malpractice insurance paid the maximum. His assets, what Isabella hadn't stolen, were awarded to me. The house in Wellesley was mine, though I'd never live there again. I sold it to a family with young children, hoping happy memories would replace the horror. The proceeds went partly to Martha, whose bravery had saved me, and partly to establishing a foundation for domestic abuse survivors. Recovery wasn't linear. Post-traumatic stress disorder manifested in unexpected ways: claustrophobia in small spaces, panic attacks triggered by wine cellars, inability to sleep in complete darkness. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a trauma specialist, worked with me twice a week. She explained that my brain had adapted to survival mode for 2 years. Rewiring would take time. Some days I felt strong, others I couldn't leave my apartment. Physical therapy helped rebuild muscle mass. Nutritionists addressed deficiencies from 2 years of controlled diet. A dentist repaired damage from grinding my teeth during captivity. Each appointment was a step toward reclaiming my body from what Marcus had done to it. The physical healing was actually easier than psychological recovery. Bodies are resilient. Minds carry invisible scars that take longer to fade. Returning to work seemed impossible at first. How could I care for patients when I could barely care for myself? But Dr. Williams, who'd treated me that first day, became a friend and advocate. She arranged for me to return gradually, starting with administrative duties, then supervised patient interaction. My colleagues were supportive without being pitying. They treated me as a survivor, not a victim. The distinction mattered enormously. 6 months after my release, I published an essay in the New England Journal of Medicine about recognizing coercive control in relationships. It went viral, reaching beyond medical professionals to mainstream media. Speaking requests poured in. At first, I declined them all, but eventually I realized my story could help others recognize warning signs. I started speaking at conferences, hospitals, women's shelters. Each telling got easier, transformed trauma into purpose. The foundation I established grew beyond my expectations. We provided legal resources, safe houses, therapy, and job training for survivors. Martha became the director, her compassion and organizational skills perfect for the role. We helped 50 women in the first year escape situations similar to mine. Some cases were less extreme, others worse. Each survivor's story reinforced that domestic abuse crosses all social, economic, and educational boundaries. I moved to Portland, Oregon, seeking distance from Boston's memories. The Pacific Northwest's different landscape helped create psychological space from trauma. I bought a small house with large windows, no basement, multiple exits. Safety features that would seem paranoid to some felt necessary to me. I adopted a rescue dog, a German Shepherd named Luna, who'd also survived abuse. We healed together, 2 survivors learning to trust again. Dating seemed impossible for the first year. How do you explain to someone that your ex-husband imprisoned you in a basement? When do you disclose that level of trauma? But gradually I started therapy, specifically focused on relationships. Dr. Martinez helped me recognize that Marcus hadn't destroyed my capacity for love, just temporarily damaged my ability to trust. The distinction was crucial. Love survived. Trust needed rebuilding. 2 years after my release, I met David at a conference on trauma-informed care. He was a social worker specializing in veteran PTSD, understood trauma professionally and personally. He didn't flinch when I told my story over coffee that stretched to dinner. He asked thoughtful questions, respected boundaries, never pushed for details I wasn't ready to share. When he asked for a second date, I said yes. Progress. The nightmares decreased gradually. For months, I'd wake believing I was back in the basement. Luna would nuzzle my hand, grounding me in the present. Therapy provided tools, breathing exercises, grounding techniques, cognitive restructuring. Dr. Martinez taught me to recognize triggers and manage responses. Recovery wasn't about forgetting, but integrating the experience without letting it define me. Marcus tried to contact me from prison through his attorney. He wanted to apologize again, claimed he'd found religion was in therapy, had changed. I didn't respond. His transformation, real or performed, wasn't my concern. My energy went toward healing, not absolving his guilt. Eleanor wrote once a beautiful letter of apology and support. That one I answered, acknowledging her courage in choosing justice over family loyalty. Isabella was released after serving 5 years. She was deported immediately, her real identity making headlines briefly before fading into obscurity. Derek served his full sentence, no early release for good behavior. Marcus remained in maximum security after attacking another inmate who mentioned my name. His surgical hands that once saved lives now served time for destroying one. Writing became therapeutic. Beyond medical journals, I started a memoir. Not for publication initially, just for processing. But beta readers, other survivors, said it needed to be shared. The book, From Basement to Breakthrough, became a bestseller. Proceeds went to the foundation. Book tours were challenging, reliving trauma repeatedly, but reader responses made it worthwhile. Women recognized warning signs, left dangerous situations, sought help because of my story. The 5-year anniversary of my release approached with mixed emotions. 5 years of freedom felt simultaneously eternal and instant. I'd rebuilt a career, written a book, helped hundreds of survivors, even found love with David. But some wounds never fully heal, just scar over enough to be bearable. I still couldn't go into basements. Wine made me nauseous. The sound of electronic locks triggered panic. Looking back, I see how Marcus's need for control escalated gradually, then suddenly. The warning signs were there: isolation from friends, financial control, gaslighting, devaluation. But intelligent, educated, successful women can still become victims. Predators like Marcus choose carefully, exploit slowly, strike decisively. Understanding this helped release shame that wasn't mine to carry. The final police report stated Marcus had been planning to kill me. He'd been researching methods, waiting for attention to die down. If Martha hadn't acted, if James Morrison hadn't investigated, if Eleanor hadn't turned against her son, I would have become another missing person statistic. Instead, I survived to tell this story, to warn others, to prove that even from the darkest basements, freedom is possible. People often ask if I forgive Marcus. Forgiveness implies absolution I'm not qualified to grant. I've released the hatred that initially consumed me, not for his sake, but mine. Hatred is another form of captivity. But forgiveness, that's between Marcus and whatever judgment awaits him. My focus is on living well, helping others, and appreciating freedom that once seemed impossible. The sunrise I watch now from my Portland home hits differently than before. Colors seem brighter after 2 years of artificial light. Bird songs carry weight after silence. Simple choices like what to eat, when to sleep, where to go feel profound after having them stolen. Freedom isn't just absence of captivity, it's presence of choice. Every day I wake free is a victory Marcus couldn't steal. Sometimes people say I'm brave. But bravery implies choice, and survival often offers none. You endure because the alternative is death. You fight because submission means erasure. You hope because despair would grant your captor ultimate victory. What looks like bravery from outside feels like necessity from within. The only choice was whether to let Marcus's cruelty define my remaining years. I chose to let it refine rather than define me. This story could have ended differently. Many similar stories do. But mine ended with justice, recovery, and purpose born from pain. Not because I was special, but because Martha had conscience, James Morrison had tenacity, Eleanor had courage to choose right over blood, and a system sometimes works as intended. My survival was individual. My rescue was collective. That's why I share this story, to honor those who saved me and encourage those still needing saving. I know there are women reading this who recognize their own relationships in mine, who hear their partner's voice in Marcus's gaslighting, who feel walls closing in though no physical basement exists. To you I say, trust your instincts. Seek help secretly if needed. Document everything. Tell someone, anyone, even if you're not ready to leave. Martha saved my life by refusing to be complicit in silence. Someone in your life might be your Martha, waiting for permission to help. Today marks exactly 5 years since I walked out of that basement. 5 years of rebuilding, recovering, reclaiming. Marcus still has 20 years left on his sentence. Sometimes I imagine him in his cell, smaller than the one he built for me, but with something I never had knowledge of when it ends. He knows his release date. I never knew if mine would come. That uncertainty was its own torture. Now he lives with certainty of consequences, and I live with uncertainty of freedom. Strange how justice inverts situations. The woman who entered that basement died there in many ways. The woman who emerged was reborn through trauma into someone Marcus wouldn't recognize. Stronger for having been broken, compassionate for having suffered, purposeful for having survived. He tried to erase me, but instead refined me into someone he could never have contained. That's the irony of trying to break another human. You might forge them into something unbreakable. My message to anyone who thinks they can imprison another person physically or psychologically: you might succeed temporarily. You might fool the world briefly. But truth has a way of surfacing, conscience has a way of speaking, and survivors have a way of surviving. Your victim might become your reckoning. Your prisoner might become your prosecutor. Your attempt to silence might amplify their voice beyond anything you imagined. To those supporting survivors, believe them. The stories that sound too horrible to be true often are true precisely because predators count on that disbelief. Don't ask why they didn't leave sooner. Ask how you can help them now. Don't judge their choices from your position of safety. Support their journey from wherever they are. Martha risked everything to help me when staying silent would have been easier. Be someone's Martha. This story ends not with hatred or bitterness, but with hard-won wisdom. Evil exists sometimes wearing surgeon scrubs and wedding rings. But good exists too in housekeepers with conscience lawyers who work for justice over profit mothers who choose truth over family reputation. My basement was dark, but light found its way in through unexpected cracks. That's what I carry forward, not the darkness of where I was, but the light that led me out. Freedom tastes different when you've been caged. Love feels different when you've been betrayed. Trust comes harder but means more when rebuilt from rubble. I am not grateful for what Marcus did, but I'm grateful for who I became in spite of it. He gave me trauma. I made it into purpose. He gave me captivity. I made it into appreciation for freedom. He tried to end my story. Instead, he gave me one worth telling. If you recognize yourself in my story, if you're planning escape or recovering from one, know that you're not alone. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below with your own story if you're ready, or just write survived. If that's all you can manage. Subscribe to follow my ongoing journey and the stories of other survivors finding their voices. Like this video to help it reach those still trapped in their own basements, physical or psychological. Thank you for witnessing my truth. May you never need this knowledge, but if you do, may you remember that basements have exits even when you can't see them. Even when they seem impossible, they exist. Mine did. Yours does too. Keep looking, keep hoping, keep surviving. Your release date is coming, and when it does, it will be the end of your captor's power and the beginning of your reclamation. Stay strong. Freedom is closer than you think.